Good evening and welcome to the LaRouche Organization Friday Symposium. It is February 7th, but as I always inform people, this is being pre-recorded on February 6th, just in case there is some major development that I neglect to mention. That's why. Now, the topic this evening is going to be Lyndon LaRouche's Oasis plan, which I would say has become now much more necessary and possible thanks to the press conference of Donald Trump and Bibi Netanyahu, where Trump made this very ill-conceived, bizarre proposal that the United States is going to take over Gaza, leading me to wonder if we're going to soon have an alliance of Palestinians, Panamanians, Canadians, and Greenlanders all trying to resist various real estate and plans. I just want to say as background, because people know we have been leading a fight also to confirm Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence, Kash Patel as Director of the FBI, and have recognized the significance of Robert Kennedy Jr.'s insistence on the CIA role in the assassinations of his father and uncle, President Kennedy. Clearly, there is an assault on the criminal lying intelligence agencies, and that is a good thing. These are very rotten people who've lied us into terrible wars. We have a huge revolutionary shift going on in the United States and Western Europe in rejection of a policy of nuclear war with Russia. And frankly, the US election was very much affected by the opposition to the genocide in Gaza. That's why no one wanted to vote for Kamala Harris and Genocide Joe, as he has become known. However, what we seem to be lacking is a solution. And this is what urgently has to be put on the table. And it's my belief that we have an opportunity now as never before, precisely because there is so much, in a sense, chaos and uncertainty. And hopefully some of the criminals from the various lying intelligence agencies will be back on their heels trying to regroup, and we may be able to get some things done that we couldn't do otherwise. So President Trump made this proposal. Clearly, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Jordan, all have said we are not taking in the Palestinian population. We support a two-state solution. There must be a Palestinian state. That was the last officially recognized international resolution at the United Nations, the 1967 borders. And now this opposition has been so intense, the Trump White House is walking back a little what they're saying. His press spokesperson said, oh, we didn't say permanently relocated. We said temporarily. There won't be U.S. boots on the ground. That's still not a solution, and you have to wonder whether it's true or not. So we need to get this program out. There is a solution. People are now saying, well, there isn't any solution. No one has a better idea. Well, we have a better idea. Lyndon LaRouche had a better idea, and he outlined it exactly 50 years ago in 1975. So now, that being said, let me just say what we are looking at in Gaza, and now the West Bank also is under siege, but it's really horrific. And I understand that you can even see from satellite images the fact that it has just been reduced to dust and rubble. But I'm going to play here a short video from someone there on the ground on TikTok, which also interviews some of the Palestinian people who are not going to leave. They are absolutely not going to leave their land, so you can forget that plan, in spite of the difficulty and the hardship. So why don't we go ahead just so people can see what this looks like.
دمار هائل يابا، ده دمار هائل. انظر هذا، إذا من يقف هنا وينظر حولنا يقول إنه هذا ليس هذا زلزال مدمر.
عيني دمعت، ما قدرتش قلت مخيمنا مش هيك، كان مخيمنا بالصورة الأفضل بالأحسن. إحنا طلعنا والابراج واقفه، الدور واقفه، لا جيران كثير مستشهدين ولا حد فاقدين.
تصورنا الوضع انه يكون في بيت، بس الان اللي لقيت انه بركان او زلزال في المنطقه.
انا قاعد بفكر وماشي مش عارف، مش يعني في غيبوبه، مش عارف كيف بدي اعمل، يعني وين بدنا نحط، يعني طلع كيف طلع زي ما انت شايف.
هنا الشارع كله، هذا كله قبور، الناس بتيجي بتيأس وبتروح.
أنا أولادي لحتى الآن تحت الرضم، يعني أنا حاولت إنه أنا أطلعهم وإنه أنا أعمل، وجاني الدفاع المدني حاول، فإنه من صعوبة الدمار.
جاي بدور على قبر أمي وأخوي، دفناهم في الاجتياح اللي فات.
مكفي خيم، مكفي تعب، تعبنا نفسيا فعليا، احنا تعبنا نفسيا مش قادرين نتأقلم.
انت راضي بخيمه وحمام فوق بيتك، فوق الركام.
بهمش يحطوا لي، وين بدي اروح يمه؟ وين اروح؟ لو بدي اجيب حصوه.
So it's almost surreal. It looks like something from a science fiction movie. It's obviously a very serious reconstruction job. And one thing that people have said is that there's 50 million tons of rubble. Some have said that it'll take a decade just to remove that. There have been damage or total elimination of 92% of the houses. 90% of the population is displaced. Over half of the hospitals have been destroyed. 4 out of the 6 sewage treatment plants have been damaged or totally destroyed. Half of the water depots are destroyed. The death toll, I believe, is something around 60,000 official. That is where they have the names. But people who have been there, Dr. Perlmutter, who was there, who has worked in Haiti and after Katrina, said just knowing what the rubble, the situation, thinks that the British medical journal Lancet, I think, reported that the death toll probably was going to be 186,000, 200,000, something like that. The destruction is massive. Now, I'll leave it because one of my guests is going to say more. There's one major country in the world that has an excellent record at building things very quickly and very well, but we will hear from him on that. I'm going to go now to Jason Ross of the LaRouche science team and on the board with me of the LaRouche organization, and who produced a wonderful video on the Oasis plan, and he's going to tell us what LaRouche's proposal was, and is.
Thanks, Diane. Thank you. Well, the first thing I want to say is that one of the accurate statements that Trump has made recently was that if the United States and China were to work together, what couldn't they accomplish? And this plan I'm about to discuss is something that could only occur in this world, I believe, through the cooperation between those two countries. So let's take a look at what this Oasis plan is here. Let me hit share screen. Bring on it. Okay, there we go. So the Oasis plan, this is a schematic of it. It calls for the construction of water infrastructure, most importantly, also transportation infrastructure. The goal with this project is to refill the Dead Sea, to build new waterways, water conveyances from the Mediterranean to the Dead Sea, passing east to west, and then coming up from the Red Sea, from the Gulf of Aqaba up to the Dead Sea, and along the way of both of these have the opportunity to do local desalination, nuclear-powered desalination, as LaRouche called for it, to be able to provide enormous amounts of water, and that this would be the key infrastructure improvement for the entire region, and really an example for the entire world for how to deal with water shortages, water politics, water crises. Between that and infrastructure that would make effective an entirety for the Palestinian state, this is the overview. So in terms of what the idea is behind this, let me read a short quote from LaRouche. He says in 1995, this is from a paper he wrote called "What is God That Man is in His Image?" He says, each person is given the intellectual potential which no animal has, not only the power not only to imagine states of nature which have never before existed in the universe, but under certain restrictions to impose new ideas efficiently upon the universe generally. The condition to accomplish this is that the imagination is brought into accord with universal lawfulness. It is creativity so defined which represents the individual person's intellect cast in the image of God's efficiently creative intellect. By this means, one is able to recognize, among one's own efficient forms of intellectual states, a quality which is a reflected image of God. So from the top level, the human species fundamentally different from any other form of life on this planet, any other form of life that we know of existing anywhere in the universe, in that we are able to transform our relationship to nature. And that has been the history of our species, improving the environment to better suit our needs. Now, you see an example of this if we take a look at the Earth at night. We can see the development of electricity infrastructure around the world. You can see areas that are light versus dark. This is some years old, so it may no longer be as accurate as it was then. But the general trend you can clearly observe. So let's take a look at infrastructure in this region that we're discussing here. Now, the area is extremely short on water. You can see there are some gray areas, but an awful lot of brown, an awful lot of dust. Around the Dead Sea, which you see in the bottom of the image, it's extremely saline, nothing's growing there. So the issue of water is paramount. Now, the average water use per person in the area, this is before the recent destruction, was that Israelis, including those living in West Bank settlements, use 247 liters a day, whereas West Bank Palestinians were only using 82.4, and those West Bank Palestinians not connected to the water grid were only using 26 liters of water per person per day. This is only 1/4 of what the World Health Organization recommends as the minimum. An enormous shortage. Now, looking at the geography of the region, we have an enormous depth of the Dead Sea. You can see here it's more than 400 meters below sea level. This is pretty deep. What it means is that water would like to flow from the Mediterranean, from the Red Sea, into the Dead Sea, and the Oasis plan uses this to its advantage. This is a map on the left of rainfall in the area. This is, I don't intend the political borders on this map are not a statement. This is just the data that I had available. You can see the huge shortage of water. So the way Israel has dealt with this is been building a national water carrier, taking the water mostly from the Sea of Galilee up in the north, and this is part of the conflict with Syria historically over the Golan Heights, has also been to protect the water sources to ensure that Israel would be able to continue drawing the amount of water that it's drawing from that lake. You can see these water carriers do not include the Palestinian areas. Israel's also been developing a great deal of desalination for infrastructure along the Mediterranean coast. And as this image shows on the right, in 2020, inside Israel, water use was 24% desalinated, so taken from the ocean, 23% treated wastewater, and 53% new withdrawals of surface or groundwater. So the ability to desalinate is only beginning, and overall it can be much greater. Now, this is a specific image going along from the Gulf of Aqaba in the south up to the Dead Sea in the north and Amman, Jordan, in the very north of this image. This calls for bringing seawater north along along the existing, trickle of a river there, and along the way building desalination plants, pumping stations, also hydropower, to be able to provide water as far up as Amman, which itself is also extremely water short. So to wrap it up as a brief introduction to this, we can see the region as part of a global context, or at least a regional context in this image. If we have the World Land Bridge that the LaRouche movement, the Schiller Institute has proposed for decades, well, this region is the meeting point of 3 continents. This is where Africa, Asia, Europe come together. The potential, if there is peace and development in this region, for amazing transportation developments, for processing in the area, for development, it is really unrivaled potentially anywhere in the world. This is a fantastic, could be a fantastic area. And that goes to the issue of why the British have tried for so many years to prevent peace in this region and to prevent the kind of land-based development that this would allow in favor of their historic maritime economic influence. But you can see here, if we have the transportation networks, heading west into Egypt, into Africa, going on to other countries in Southwest Asia, and connecting down into Saudi Arabia, and then moving off into Eurasia, this is truly a phenomenal opportunity. The construction involved in all of this is immense. Much bigger now, given the destruction that Israel's been raining on Gaza for more than the past year, just demolishing the place. But the potential still remains. And if there's to be any real hope of a durable peace in this region, it will come through development. Let me briefly give one historic analog here. This image is a scene it's a painting depicting the 30 Years' War in Europe, which went from 1618 to 1648. These are people being hung in a tree, and this is largely a religious war, Protestants and Catholics. During this conflict, you can see shaded in the dark red areas where 2/3 of the people or cities were just gone. 33% in the orange, 33% dead in those regions. This was it's very hard to imagine this level of devastation and death over that time period. And if you think today's borders are difficult, this is the Holy Roman Empire in 1648, an enormous mix of different dukedoms and principalities and what have you. And working through all of this, the border disputes, working for peace, how did it succeed? How did the Treaty of Westphalia, which brought to a close this conflict, succeed in ending what had seemed like it could have been a perpetual conflict? Well, the key idea in this was recognizing that peace is also for the benefit of the other and of placing one's identity in the future. Let me read a couple of passages from the treaty. This peace must be so honest and seriously guarded and nourished that each part furthers the advantage, honor, and benefit of the other. A neighborliness should be renewed and flourish for peace and friendship, and flourish again. On both sides, all should be forever forgotten and forgiven. What has from the beginning of the troubles, no matter how or where from one side or the other happened in terms of hostility, so that neither because of that nor for any other reason or pretext should anyone commit or allow to happen any hostility, unfriendliness, difficulty, or obstacle. Instead, the fact that each and every one, from one side and the other, both before and during the war, committed insults, violent acts, hostilities, damages, and injuries, without regard of persons or outcomes, should be completely put aside, so that everything, whatever one could demand from another under his name, will be forgotten to eternity. if you're looking for analogs to today, this isn't an exact one, but it shows the potential of thinking about the future and of thinking about development, which was also part of this treaty, that made it possible to resolve a religious, in this case, a religious conflict that had been going on for decades and led to immense devastation. What kind of world paradigm, what kind of relations in particular among the US and China would make it possible to achieve such a resolution upwards in Southwest Asia today?
Great. Thank you very much, Jason. I'm really glad you showed those images from the religious war, because people say, oh, you can never, people have been fighting forever, you can never resolve it, and that makes it very striking. So I will now introduce Hussein Askary, who is the West Asia coordinator for the Schiller Institute and also with the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden, and who travels a lot and will also have something to say about the plan. So Hussein, welcome. Really glad you could join us. And please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Diane. I'm very, very happy to be with you again. And also to Jason, thank you very much for your words and presentations. I actually just came back from Iraq, my native country. I can say something about that later, maybe, if you have time. But concerning the situation in Gaza, of course, what President Trump did, I was observing the reactions to that, is actually there's... ironically, he did a big disfavor to Netanyahu in that sense, because what he proposed, in the way he proposed it, made it impossible to implement what he himself proposed. And also, he, because of the reactions in the Arab world, especially from allies of the United States, like Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Jordan, who were supposed to get the relocated Palestinians, they were the first ones to criticize the plan and reject it completely. So there is now, we can either take what Trump says seriously and forget about all hope, or we should not take him seriously. He is either very, very, very smart or very, very, very stupid for proposing such a thing. And I don't think it's, we should not take what he said now seriously. This could lead to something completely different, but it would take a lot of work and effort and mobilization. And I really appreciate the fantastic work the LaRouche movement is doing inside the United States by both exposing the genocide committed against the Palestinian people, but also bringing new ideas to people. Now, concerning relocation, I think to start with, we need to relocate a bunch of people. First of all, we should relocate Jared Kushner, who is behind this kind of stupid idea. I think he can be relocated to Maui Island in Hawaii, where there were terrific fires last year, I think, or the year before. Most of the golf courses there and the tourist resorts were burned. A lot of people are still not living in houses, decent houses, so he can have a fantastic, incredible, wonderful, amazing real estate project in Maui Island in Hawaii, rather than in Gaza. The other people who should be relocated is like Benjamin Netanyahu. He should be relocated to The Hague and tried for crimes against humanity. And of course, the situation has been so terrible. But I mean, it's good you brought up this question of what happened during the 30 Years' War, but unfortunately, this was. We learned later, but the world was watching the genocide taking place in Gaza, and but there is still hope. You know, the same countries, the Arab countries, for example, who were passively watching the slaughter, now they are very active and, you know, criticizing the policy, and they want a two-state solution. Saudi Arabia have openly said there will be no more normalization of relations with Israel without a Palestinian state, and this has now become the main policy of all the Arab countries. So a two-state solution is imperative. What Jason said also about, you know, that China and the United States can work together is as Trump himself said, we can solve all kinds of problems. I can give a couple of proposals how China and the United States can work together. But also, I mean, in looking at the situation in Gaza itself, we don't know how the ceasefire will end up if the Netanyahu government and their right-wing extremists will go back to the fight when they find out their plans are not, going anywhere. So let's hope that this will be resolved in a peaceful manner. Remember that in July, actually last year in Beijing, Hamas accepted actually to concede control of Gaza to the PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization. The Chinese managed to bring all the 14 different Palestinian factions, and they issued the Beijing Declaration. The most important part of it was that Hamas was ready to give up control over Gaza to the Palestinian Liberation Organization and the Palestinian Authority and start ceasefire negotiations. And unfortunately, the criminal people in the Biden administration and, of course, the Israeli government, they rejected that. But furthermore, they went and assassinated the head of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, in Tehran, another provocation, to sabotage the whole process of, handing over the control of Gaza to the PLO and getting Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and other countries involved in stabilizing the situation. So the whole thing was sabotaged and delayed. Anyway, concerning the situation in Gaza itself, with all the rubble and stuff, I can mention also one other important example, which also might involve Russia in this situation, because after the Second Chechen War, Grozny, if you see pictures of Grozny, the capital of Chechnya, it was also turned into rubble mostly. But you look at Grozny now, it's one of the very modern, beautiful city built back to even much better than it was before. So it would be interesting to look at that example. Now, there were many things which Lyndon LaRouche criticized in the I'd like to share first which Lyndon LaRouche rightly criticized in the Oslo Agreement in 1993, which neglected the economic aspect of the development of the lives of the Palestinian people and all the different kinds of economic development projects which Jason went through, that this was completely neglected. But unfortunately, also there are people in Israel who were not really had any intention to let a Palestinian state and let the peace process go forward. You remember 1995, Yitzhak Rabin, who believed in peace and coexistence with the Palestinians, he was assassinated and things went downhill since then. But LaRouche insisted that this is the key to the whole thing. But if we have to look at the big picture, and the reason why we have this tension in the world, as has been argued very often, is that the problem is that the Western financial or transatlantic financial economic system is collapsing, and that there is a rising new paradigm in the world which will deprive the people in power in London and in Washington and New York of their hegemony over the world, which has continued for now a few centuries. And therefore, their only solution they see is continued war. On the other side, we have this other ideas that we can have actually peace through economic development. And this is the image which the LaRouche movement started with, of connecting all the world's nations through economic development corridors. Now, this is also incorporated in the Belt and Road Initiative proposed by China in 2013, and it's advancing actually large parts of the world, but unfortunately not all over the world. So if we look at another issue which is critical is along the new Silk Road, you also have the major challenge of desertifications. We have the largest deserts are located in the area between northern China and the Atlantic Ocean in Morocco and Mauritania. So this is an issue which has to be dealt with if we were going to succeed in, bringing economic development and prosperity, but also more importantly, peace to the region. I visited China. I wanted to give this example from China because China is the world leader now in fighting desertification and greening the deserts, but also in developing new technologies for agriculture in desert areas where you have very little water. The other nation, of course, which is leader in the world is Israel itself, who have developed, technologies to for agriculture in desert areas with scarcity of water, but also high temperatures. Now here we see the Taklamakan Desert. This is the second largest desert in the world, or shifting sand desert in the world. It's part of the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. I was there last year for like around 2 weeks, traveling around the area. And if you just pay attention to the area at the edge of the desert where I have the arrow, it's called Korla. There's a city there too. Now, China actually recently managed to encircle this whole desert, which is, as big as, major portion of Western Europe, with green belts to stop the expansion of the desert itself. But in this area, it's mind you that the amount of precipitation, the rain and snow that falls in this region is equal to what falls in Saudi Arabia itself, 150 millimeters per year. But they're also blessed by mountains in the neighboring countries which bring water to the rivers. So in this middle of this desert, you have some of the most advanced agricultural lands, ironically. So I visited this cotton farm in Korla on the edge of the desert, and it's ironically also what's called the Oasis future farm.
From south of the city of Korla in Xinjiang, which is just a few, not so big distance to the second largest desert in the world, which is the Taklamakan Desert. But surprisingly, what you find here is that you have enormous agricultural activity in Xinjiang. And it's very interesting that the use of new technologies, machines, robots is revolutionizing the agricultural process using drones, using modern sensors of the soil temperature, soil humidity.
As you can see, this is complete desert, it's dusty. But what is interesting is that you find infrastructure everywhere. You have the electricity lines, you have the roads, but also on the sides of the road, you have pipelines bringing water. You can see the manholes on the side of the road. But there's an enormous effort to reclaim this desert area. And one interesting principle they have is that the farmers who can reclaim the land, they can own it as long as they grow the land. But they will also be provided with all kinds of, machinery, technology, seeds, and loans to plant.
Hussein, were you on a train or in a helicopter or something? How did you...
I was on a bus.
A bus?
Yeah. But it was a high. See, they are covering the soil with plastic sheets to prevent evaporation of the water. And then they use drip irrigation, new technologies. So this is very important for the, in West Asia. It's not oil, it's water, which is the most precious commodity that people need. So this vast desert, and also if you look at the demographic distribution in the Middle East, so-called West Asia, actually the populations, the Arab populations, they live in very narrow strips around the rivers. And most of the land areas, like in Egypt, now they are reclaiming the desert. But in Egypt, 90% of the population live only on 7% of the land because the rest is desert. So we have enormous areas of, desert areas. Now, this is the city of Korla. Remember that Xinjiang Uyghur, people say there was a genocide. There was terrorism, there was extremism, and separatism plaguing this area. But what the Chinese did, instead of bombing this region, they built the most advanced infrastructure for the people of Xinjiang. And this is in the middle of the desert. So you have some of the most modern, towns and cities right in Xinjiang, but also right on the edge of the second largest desert in the world. So I was really amazed how much work and an investment was done in this area. It's really mind-boggling. So to fight terrorism and extremism, you need to build modern infrastructure. You have to give, I visited schools and kindergartens. It's just state of the art, you have to educate the people. You have to give them a hope for the future and a good living standard. So this is how you solve the problem with terrorism and extremism to achieve peace. Okay, so if we go to the region, we look at this area of West Asia where Palestine and Gaza is located, as Jason said, it's a fantastic geographical location between three continents, Asia, Europe, and Africa, between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. It has, inside this ring, we have 500 million people projected to become 1 billion people, mostly young people with relatively good education. We have also the 2/3 of the oil and a great part of the natural gas in the world in this area, but also we have enormous financial resources. The Gulf Cooperation Council wealth funds, sovereign wealth funds, they have $4 trillion in foreign reserves. Now, these are now being traditionally invested in Western banks, financial systems, but the nations of the region have learned the lesson of the 2008 financial crisis. I don't think the Saudis will invest $600 billion or $1 trillion in the US economy. They're investing inside Saudi Arabia. They're building industries, modern technology in Saudi Arabia. So this is a fantastic area if we have peace and stability, it will be very important for the whole world. Now, through the years, we have developed the idea of the development corridors, and now it's synchronized with the Belt and Road Initiative and the Maritime Silk Road. So it's very, very possible. Many nations, all the nations in the region are now members in the Belt and Road Initiative. They are working intensively with China on building infrastructure, even industries now popping up in Saudi Arabia, in the Emirates, in Egypt, modern industries in Turkey, built by Chinese companies, in Ethiopia. Remember, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Ethiopia, and the United Arab Emirates, they became members of the BRICS this year. Saudi Arabia, not decided yet, but at least Iran, of course, is also now in the BRICS. So the idea of building development corridors was brought by Lyndon LaRouche already, as Diane said, the Oasis plan goes back to 1975, it's 50 years ago, but in 2002, just before the invasion of Iraq, Lyndon LaRouche was in Abu Dhabi and presented this whole package of both building development corridors in the region, but also building nuclear power for water desalination, but also to build modern industries like the petrochemical industries, that these nations should not simply export raw oil, but they should use nuclear power to create a higher value for the oil and gas by producing other industrial materials like plastics, paints, fertilizers and all kinds of things you can do with oil and gas rather than burning it. Unfortunately, of course, the invasion of Iraq created a completely different situation. But the United Arab Emirates, actually, a few years after this, they launched their nuclear power program, and now they have 4 nuclear power plants built by South Korea, actually connected to the grid. So then finally we go to this, to the Oasis plan, which Jason have so fantastically explained, and this is the basis for, for peace. You cannot have peace without economic development, without giving people a decent living standard and hope for the future. Now, I would like to actually give some sort of an ironical proposal here. When I was in Xinjiang, in Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang province, I actually asked them if there was a subway system, and I visited their subway system. It was completed in 2019, and it's fantastic, state-of-the-art modern subway system. I have video clips from there. I don't have time to show it now, but what was really fascinating for me is that I looked at the map of, the subway system itself and Gaza. Gaza is 40 kilometers long and 12 kilometers wide at the widest area. 40 kilometers is what a marathon run is. So a marathon runner can, go from southern part of Gaza to the north in 4 hours. Now, I thought about this idea that the tunnel system in Gaza, which was used for the war, can actually be turned into a tool for peace and development and prosperity for the people in Gaza. By building a subway system similar to the one in Urumqi in Xinjiang province. The Xinjiang subway system is a one-line system. It starts in the south and ends at the international airport in the north. It's about 32 kilometers long. So it's 4 kilometers shorter than the length of Gaza. And I think the geology of the Gaza area is quite suitable for tunneling, given the geological structure, the limestone and the sandstone, which are easy to dig, but also they need a lot of support to build. I looked at a similar, exact same length project in Izmir in Turkey. Looks quite similar landscape. It was financed through a loan through the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. It involved Chinese companies too. So I think what we could do is that China built this subway system in Gaza as a gift from the Chinese people to the people in Gaza, and use the subway system not only for transport of individuals, but also as a development corridor where you can have electric lines, telecommunication lines, water service lines, but also transport lines for different kinds of enterprises and businesses. Gaza should have an international airport. It should have a port, but also we have to build industrial parks in Gaza. For example, for petrochemical industry, for textile industry, and all kinds of other industries. That's quite possible today. Gaza has a fantastic geographical location, and there's abundant natural gas actually nearby. So, but the United States can either finance this project, and also there is a role for the US Army to play here. Actually, can join hands with the people in Gaza, with China, with Russia and others, and clear the rubble. The US Army Corps of Engineers can be of help in this situation. So I present this as, it sounds a bit ironical that the Hamas dug tunnels can suddenly become a modern subway system. I don't think this is far-fetched. Everything is possible. We can, garner the goodwill and as Jason said at the beginning about what LaRouche said about our creativity and imagination are connected together, and also our goodwill to do the good for all people. If we manage to make people understand what is human inside us, and to offer it to other human beings, I think all this is possible. The situation has looked gloomy and terrible, but I think there is still chance to get these ideas implemented, get peace, get the Palestinians their state, get back their rights. This is quite possible. It's good for the Palestinians, but it's also good for the Israelis themselves. So this is, I think, hope to make people move ahead and not be stuck in it, because we need to have some imagination. We should get out of the box of geopolitics built, or the cage of geopolitics built for us by the British Empire, which the Palestinian situation is one result of that. So we have to think outside the box. We have to do everything we can to get people to think. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Let me just ask Jason, do you have any thoughts in response to what Hussein said, or in general otherwise?
Well, it's certainly great to get a on the ground report about the great strides being made when you do invest in these kinds of things and transform the environment and build infrastructure and water, and how exciting all this can be. I think that's good for us to hear as Americans. That's not exactly been our paradigm recently. I think that the subway system, in addition to surface transportation for longer distances, I mean, they're parallel infrastructure projects that would work together. And I just think it shows you what can be done, how great an impact human beings can have on the environment in a positive way when you intend to do it.
Yeah, I still am very struck by the things you read from the Treaty of Westphalia and the imagery, because, well, of course, we had Tony Blair saying we're in the post-Westphalian order and we should just forget it, and people who have been fighting will always be fighting, and we should start new fights. But you see that there's a different impulse for human beings if they choose to act on it. And I think one of the things that happened in the religious war, which had really sort of been a century, with the last 30 years capping it off, was that people recognized there was no future. That is, if they were to continue on the path they were on, that their children would never grow up. They would be in perpetual war. One of the things I was struck by after that, paintings from the end of the 30 Years' War, and you see nobody has both arms and legs, right? Everybody has had some injury. The destruction was just so massive. But they could decide willfully that they were going to forgive and not look back. And I believe the negotiations took about 4 years, so it wasn't instantaneous. It's not to make light of it and say that it was easy. But I do think if you have a positive mission, that people can find themselves working together to that end. And certainly a common enemy of everybody there is the desert. So Hussein, what thoughts more do you have? I mean, clearly, one other thing I wanted to add, and I'd like your thoughts, since Hussein, you are the one of the three of us who is not an American. We saw when Trump came in how quickly, I mean, he wasn't even in yet, and there was a ceasefire and the beginning of the hostage release, which indicates what we had been saying the whole time, which was the instant that the president of the United States decided to weigh in forcefully with a policy, that it could be done. So therefore, Biden could not say, oh, we've been trying to stop that. No, we were not trying to. One phone call would have stopped the slaughter. And I think similarly, if we can recruit the United States to such a perspective, then it is virtually, we are about 90% of the way there. But Hussein, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, as I said, I was in Iraq recently, and I'm talking to people all over the region. I mean, the one thing which this, genocidal war in Gaza has produced is that people don't trust anybody. They don't trust the United States. They don't trust the Europeans. They also this whole, there is no credibility for anything they say too.
Right.
So people are a bit pessimistic. But what is interesting is to look at the reaction of the people in Gaza themselves. Although their homes were completely demolished, they could have seen videos of that, but everybody who were trapped in southern Gaza, they rushed to go back to their homes. You know, there was rubble. But this shows how strong people are and how important it is for them to have a normal life. And if you look at, you know, I mean, the Palestinian people are amazing. They are a bit unlike all the other people in the region because they have been suffering for 70, 80 years, but they still believe in themselves. They still believe in their future. In the camps, in the tent camps in southern Gaza, where people were relocated during the war, I mean, they restarted their schools. The kids were going back, trying to continue their school. And, we have to learn something from the children of Gaza, that they have aspirations, they have dreams, and they will never give up. I mean, one thing that Trump is, this plan by Trump will not work. It's not because Egypt and Jordan will not accept the Palestinians. The Palestinians will refuse to move 1 inch. They would die rather than, accept to be removed from their land. It will not get worse than what has been. So this idea of, hope and optimism is really, really key to this whole situation, because many people lost faith in humanity in the past year and a half because nothing was being done to save the Palestinian people. But there is still hope. We can still, I mean, as I said, I don't take everything President Trump says seriously, because he's trying to test people. He will see the reactions, and then, by the time he will meet with President Putin and President Xi Jinping, he might be back to his normal size. He's now inflated by his victory and the internal dynamics of the situation in the United States, but he's not paying attention to the global dynamics, because the world has changed since he left the White House in 2020, and the world has changed dramatically. And it's important to also note that, I mean, people don't hate the United States. People don't hate the Europeans. They still want to live in peace. People in Iran, they hope that, there will be an agreement with the United States to end the sanctions and, get back to a normal life. People still hope that this is possible. So, but everything depends on what kind of dynamic or environment President Trump is living in, and what kind of dynamics that can be created inside the United States, because only the United States can change these policies, because these policies are also generated or supported by the United States. Of course, we have the British problem and the right-wing extremists in Israel, but the United States can decide just by snapping their finger to end this situation. So although it has been very, very painful, people still have hope that something positive could come out of this, because people are really, really tired of this situation.
Yeah. No, I think that's true. And I think it would be good for Americans to really reflect a bit on how the rest of the world sees us, because we have spent an awful lot of time running around lecturing people on human rights and this and that, and then we fail to act to stop a genocide which is occurring before the eyes of the world. But also, anyone who's traveled here has seen the suffering of the American people, the conditions of our prisons, the conditions of the housing. It's not as if we have benefited by wreaking havoc on the planet. We have also caused our own population to suffer. And ironically, and I think it's the principle of the universe, really, if we decided that our nation was going to do good internationally, if we were going to engage in such a reconstruction program together with the people of Palestine and the people of Israel, if we were going to do this, I think our internal policy would similarly be affected. it is universal. You either think man is an animal or you think man is a human being above the animal species in the image of the creator, if you will. And depending on that outlook, that is how you're going to teach mankind. It's not different internally and externally. I also think Israel is going to find itself severely damaged by what they have done, not only their reputation in the world and how people look at them, but the young people. Myself, having combat veterans in my family, knowing that the United States has still 22 soldier suicides per day, the psychological damage that has been done to tens of thousands of young Israelis by forcing them to participate in war crimes is another aspect of this from which it's going to take the only healing is if you can do good, if you can put your existence into doing good.
I mean, look at the connection of what's the connection between the violence the United States commits abroad and the violence that occurs here domestically. I mean, in some ways you have very direct connections, like the militarization of the police. But, you know, if you've got a country that overall is doing what it's doing internationally, how can you have a good culture domestically? I mean, you know, when you think about like who is doing this, is the United States doing this? Is there a certain elite doing this? Because obviously this isn't something that most American people want and certainly don't benefit from, as you pointed out.
Yeah, I saw in Sweden you just had this big school shooting. And how many military bases does the U.S. have in Sweden now?
Well, they're planning to have 18. So it's you know, this is also another tragedy because usually in Sweden, when such strategic decisions are taken, like, for example, the last time we had a popular referendum was when the government decided to shut down nuclear power. So they had to have a popular referendum so that people could decide. This time they opted not to have a referendum because they knew that people would vote against joining NATO, for example. That Sweden has enjoyed 200 years of peace and, you know, neutrality, although it was tainted sometimes. But you know, the people in Sweden did not want to be involved on any party's side with the, you know, in this war or become members of NATO. But this time, the government said, no, we will not listen to the people, we have decided. And then we have a political elite who are completely integrated into the transatlantic Anglo-American, you know, system of narratives. But that has become discredited to a large extent. So people hope that this war will end because our society is becoming militarized to a very large extent. Everything is in military terms. We also have this situation where politicians, and especially in the right wing, who are now in the government, the xenophobic parties, they blame all the economic difficulties on immigrants. And some people suspect that this shooting in this school could be a case where, you know, somebody's, you know, discharging their rage at this situation, their own failure, their own terrible living conditions on immigrants, because this school was actually a school where immigrants were learning Swedish language and other skills. So it's a very, very tragic situation. But I think the environment we are living in is very, very destructive because people are being told we're going to have war now soon with Russia. We should be prepared, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very militarized but also depressing environment.
I think we should send over that. I think they were sending out kits, right, for people how to survive in an emergency. And, you know, in New York City, we had that hilarious video of about a minute and a half with the lady standing in front of her house saying, if there's a nuclear bomb, if you happen to be outside when the nuclear bomb explodes, go inside and remove the outer layers of your clothing. Like there's going to be anything less left. No, I think it's a revolutionary moment. Things are going to change enormously over the next days and weeks. I do think the meetings with Xi Jinping and Putin are going to bring a new perspective to our new President Trump when he hears from them. And I think there's a lot of work. I just hope the people doing the work to set up these meetings are listening to what their counterparts are saying in these other countries. So he actually goes in there prepared with a realistic view of what they're going to say. But I am optimistic. I think people are resilient. We see, it's amazing to me, the resilience of the Palestinian people, the resilience of the Iraqi people with some of the videos you showed at previous conferences of Iraqi young people. You know, we could learn something from that here. So I think we have an enormous amount of work to do. We are coming to the end of our time. Is there anything that either of you wants to say in closing or that you wish you had mentioned and forgot to say?
When Jason was speaking about creativity and our relationship to nature, but also in this situation, there's in the Islamic tradition, you know, God, the creator, talks to the humans. He said, my creatures, obey me, you become like me. You say to something be, and it becomes. So we are created, you know, in the image of a creator. We can decide by disciplining ourselves, by having a beautiful idea about ourselves, to perfecting ourselves, that we can become creators and we can change reality. The same way we can change desert into gardens, we can also change our own behavior, our own way of dealing with other human beings.
That the way you put that, Hussein, makes me think of the ending of Schiller's poem Columbus, about how the power of the mind to cause what it desires in the world. I'd like to refer back to something that you brought up, Diane, which is the fight that the LaRouche organization's been involved in to secure the nominations of Tulsi Gabbard, which, you know, now that's gone through, and then Kash Patel. The opportunity to learn about who has been promoting the terrible policies of the past years is going to have, it could have a very profound impact on the United States. Already what we're seeing with the USAID shutdowns and the USAID, well, you know, just looking around and seeing where all that money's going, you know, makes it really clear who is running things and what are they trying to do and how can that be cleaned up. So I think it is a hopeful thing that the United States and its institutions will be able to better learn why it's been fooled into adopting these counterproductive strategies. Now, that in itself doesn't create a better idea of what should be done. That's, I think, where we come in. But as far as reasons for optimism go, I would look at that as one.
Absolutely. And I just, in conclusion, want to encourage people, keep your calls going into the U.S. Senate. One particular target is Fetterman, a Democrat from Pennsylvania who said he was going to work with Trump. It's a very thin margin. Tulsi got voted through the committee. She still has to be approved by the whole Senate, and Kash Patel has not yet gotten out of committee. So continue those phone calls. We need to get this done. I agree with Jason, when the truth comes out about who was telling the lies and the nature of the lies, it may have a major effect on our foreign and domestic policies. In fact, it will definitely have a major impact, and it may cause some people to change their view on what they think about certain things, which also would be very, very good. So I'd like to thank both of you for being here. Thank people for watching. As always, please subscribe.